Hi, so you may have noticed that on the schedule it says I'm going to be talking about comps and collaboration. Switching it up a bit, if you caught Laura Hogan's excellent talk earlier about performance, we're going to talk about performance in a little different way of how to get people to care about it, specifically designers and other teammates, and how to implement all of those wonderful things that Laura mentioned earlier. So I'm Katie. I currently work at Sparkbox. I live in Columbus right now. Before that, I was in Austin, Texas. And before that, I lived in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is home of Skyline Chili Three-Ways, 3 of the members of 98 Degrees, Cincinnati Reds, and this mall, the Cincinnati Mall, which is this really cool, like retro-futuristic mall that a lot of money and time went into, and in its day it was this really awesome, like cool heyday mall. But this is what it still looks like today. Although, for one reason or another, it kept getting bought out and renovated, and more money got poured into it to make it look really beautiful. But as far as a mall goes, it's pretty crappy because there are no stores, and ultimately that means no customers. So for what it is supposed to be, this mall, it looks really cool, but functions pretty horribly. You can still go into it. It's not totally abandoned. This is what it looks like now. I took these pictures. I've been there. This is their department stores. A little sad. This is the Great American Cookie Company. It says thank you. I think it's been there for like years maybe. I don't know. But that's what the mall looks like now. And that's kind of what happens when we have things that are really beautiful, but they don't perform well for their intended purpose. So a lot of people think that performance is just a technical concern, and that happens in development, and that's kind of the only people that should be thinking of it. But everything leading up to development is where performance actually starts to happen, and that's that cultural shift, that bulk of getting everybody on board and thinking about it. And we need to start now thinking about it. Laura's talk earlier is a really great example of that, and I have a lot of shout outs to her because she's going to be here and she's like the goddess of performance. But it comes down to this cultural shift more than it being a technical one, and it's really important to get a lot of people thinking about it and caring about it and working it into our workflow just like we do anything else, accessibility, web standards, all of those other things. Performance is just another consideration. So I have a pretty narrow experience of just working at small boutique agencies of like less than 30 people. So I know what I struggle with getting performance integrated, just in my view, but I wanted to know what other people struggle with at large organizations, in-house. So I sent out a survey asking people what they struggle with. And I got a lot of different responses, a lot from smaller shops, but also a lot from really big shops, and everything in between, also ranging a lot from client services to product and in-house and everything else. The good news is that a lot of people feel empowered to ignite change in their organization, which is huge. That's kind of half the battle, is feeling like you can actually make a difference in bringing that to people's attention. And the other thing is that, yay, more than half the people are thinking about performance, and that's a priority for them. But the other bummer is that almost half of the people that answered are not, and that's kind of concerning, because when we think of all of our other efforts, our really amazing user experience, our beautiful designs, and everything else, if our sites aren't fast enough to actually reach our users, everything else can fail, and they'll never actually see it. So change begins with you, and sitting in this talk and all the other ones, you're getting all these awesome ideas, and you're going to go back and have all these awesome ideas that you're going to want to implement at your organization. And that's really great. You being excited about these things and projecting that to other teammates will go a long way. One response that I think a lot of developers feel is like, well, I just do what I can when no one's looking. I know what's to do that's faster, and I do that kind of off the clock, or just doing little things here and there. But that's not enough, because everybody who touches the project needs to be thinking about that and it needs to permeate everything that we do. The other good thing is that people who are advocating for it say it's working, 48% of those people. And hopefully for the rest of that pie chart, I can help equip people with resources to maybe start to see some change. So a lot of the hurdles that I commonly hear from people and got back in this survey, a big one is leadership. It's pretty hard to try to get these ideas that we should care about through to leadership that isn't really seeing it. I'm lucky enough to work at a place where my leadership really cares about these things and they think it's awesome and that we absolutely need to be doing this. But a lot of people struggle with leadership who might not care as much. And of course, designers can be a really big problem, and other developers not caring or using heavy frameworks and things like that. But a really big one, really big theme is just other stuff comes before performance. You know, we have so many things to juggle. We need our sites to be responsive, we need them to be accessible, we need to think of all these other things, and then marketing and ads and whatever else. Performance just kind of falls by the wayside. And a lot of that comes back to people being really frustrated with clients. Clients are kind of a big thing that everybody seems to struggle with and get really mad, and it's kind of easy to blame the client, just like they don't understand, they don't make websites. And you're right. They don't make websites, and they don't do this every day. But that's why we need to care about it enough to educate our clients properly, to get them to see why they should care about it and how this really will impact their organization in this redesign effort that we're doing together. If we think back to the early days of responsive web design, and clients were pretty hesitant to adopt it, and they were like, we don't have that many mobile users. We don't need a site that can accommodate our mobile users. And is it actually that you don't have that many mobile users? Or was it because you had a really bad mobile experience that people just didn't want to go to it on their phones? And similarly today, people are saying like, well, we don't need our sites to be fast on mobile in these other countries. We don't have that many users doing that. And is that because your site is a really bad data sucking experience on the phones? Or is it because you actually don't have that many mobile users? And with all the statistics backing up the rising usage of mobile phones to access websites, I find that pretty hard to believe that you don't actually have mobile users. So a really great and powerful statistic, I think, is that almost 8% of websites went responsive between 2013 and 2014. And that sounds pretty small, but when we think of all the websites that are out there, that's huge. That's really, really encouraging for me. What I take away from this is that these things that we care about and properly educate our clients about and get them to care about it, it works. I don't think that I have worked on a site in the past couple of years that hasn't been a responsive redesign, a responsive retrofit. That's just not how we do it, because we know that that is the most accessible way to get that to as many users. So when we can properly educate the things that we feel really passionately about to our users or to our clients, that goes a really long way, and the statistic really shows that. So I think the most important thing that we can do to get clients to care about performance is to bring it up in sales, not in development. If when we get to build it out, that's the first that they're hearing, like, we want this to be fast, that's going to be really, really difficult to retroactively kind of shoehorn all of our efforts into that. And it's just going to be pretty messy and probably not as fast as we want it to be. So the first conversations that we have with our client are so crucial to getting them to think about it in this way and plant those seeds. So it starts with our proposal, with all of our communication briefs, all of those early documents. We want to make sure that we are reiterating that and getting those ideas turning. And it doesn't need to be this really technical thing. I'm not very technical. I can't speak to it very technically, but I can use words when talking to clients like, it'll be a fast experience, it'll be a speedy redesign, and things like that, that they're like, oh yeah, that sounds good. I can get behind that. And if kind of that softer sell doesn't work, we can also use some pretty powerful data that they can't really ignore to back it up as well. Something that I like to do is go to webpagetest.org and weigh not only the client site, but also some of their competitors' sites and see the difference and use that difference to say, like, look, you're kind of slow compared to your competitors. That's pretty expensive. You could be losing a lot of, or that you're losing a lot of money or potential customers. And not only is it expensive for our clients, but it's expensive for our users as well. Tim Cadlick just came out with this site that he built, whatdoesmysitecost.com, and it's a really awesome resource. It's integrated with WebPageTest. But you can enter in your URL and see how much it actually costs different users in different countries. And Luke Wroblewski also has this great article of where he lists a bunch of these different data and statistics that you can reference for your clients. When we're talking to them early on, if they're like, oh, I don't know, that's not really important for us, we can say, like, okay, well, look at these and see how that has impacted these larger organizations. And not only that, maybe your clients don't really care about Amazon. Maybe they're not e-commerce and that doesn't really get to them. Think about what your client actually cares about. And for some, that the competitors is a really big thing. Like, we don't want them to have anything that we don't have. So trying to think of what will actually get them to feel emotional about it and wanting their sites to be fast. Leadership, I talked about this a little bit earlier, that politics are often a lot of what stands in people's way when trying to fit in performance into their workflows. The good news is a lot of people feel that they can talk to leadership, and they can come to them with ideas and be heard. And for the other people, it's a little bit more difficult, but hopefully some of these takeaways will help you talk to them a little bit easier. And it can be as easy as just like, hey, I went to this conference, I read this article, or I'm seeing all of these things pop up, and I really want to try it. I think it's something we should absolutely be trying, and have a lunch and learn and share with your team. These are the things that I found. This is what's really exciting me right now. This is the things that I think we should be caring about and why. The other thing is talking to your leadership. It's a reusable process. It's not like they're putting all of this time and money into something that is very specific to one very specific project that we're never going to use again. It's something that we hope to implement across all of our projects from here on out. And if that doesn't work, maybe you, on your next internal project, or even if it's maybe a smaller, less high stakes project, say like, let me take charge for our process and own it for this trial run and see how it shakes out. And hopefully you do a really awesome job and it's successful, and then your boss is like, oh yeah, let's reuse that. And a lot of people get really frustrated that they just don't have the time resourced to them. The PM only gave me so many hours to work on this. The client, our budget's running low, and it wasn't accounted for. And again, that goes back to if we think more to the beginning of the project and plan for it and resource for it, it'll go a lot smoother rather than trying to just like take a couple hours here, a couple hours there for it. And this comes back very strongly to PM education. We want our PMs to understand how important performance is to our workflow so that not only they can manage our resources better, but they can advocate for the clients. When the client comes back and they're asking for some super heavy feature or something else, and especially I'm going to get to performance budgets in a little bit, when we get to that, they can help maintain that and keep it on track. And it's really important to have our project managers understand the implications of what we're doing. And aesthetic heavy designers, this is near and dear to my heart. I definitely have made some pretty heavy designs before, not totally understanding like giant textures and all of these things and how they impact performance. I just like to design, and a lot of times developers are just handed a comp and it has all of these really heavy features and design aesthetics and things that the client loves and they're super excited about it, like carousels galore and parallax and all of these other things that can really weigh down the site. And it's pretty hard to take that really heavy design and then like try to make it faster. So instead of doing that, why don't we just have the designer not design something that is quite so heavy that will make it really difficult for the developer? Because ultimately, it's not like performance is like totally against everything that we want to do. It only helps facilitate all of our other efforts. It's not like, oh, that performance, like I hate that totally ruins my design. No, it just helps deliver our designs better. I really like this quote from Ethan Marcotte. He has it in the foreword in Scott Gell's Responsible Responsive Design book, which I think book apart people are out there. You might want to go take a look at that book. But the web is so much more fragile than I think we like to admit or think about. There's so many things that can happen to the connection speed or their device or anything else. There's so many things that can happen between when our user tries to get to our site and when they actually receive it. So the more that we can cut down on that sort of time between the room for error, the better. This is a screenshot that I took on my iPhone 6 on my high-speed internet at home, which is like the best case scenario, right? That's a nice phone that has a lot of capabilities on my really fast internet, and it still took a really long time to load. I took several screenshots. This took seconds to load, and it's Facebook, so like, yeah, a lot of users will wait because Facebook's pretty heavily integrated in their lives that like, okay, yeah, it takes a while to load, but it's Facebook, I need it. But when we think of probably most of the sites that we build, they're not that integrated into people's lives to where they're gonna sit around and wait for that to load. There's so many things that could have happened in these seconds that it took Facebook to pop up on my phone. My connection could have dropped. I could have just closed out and been like, this is taking entirely too long. And what does that design look like? What does that user experience look like? I don't know. I never saw it. I closed out. So thinking of all the things that could happen to prevent our really beautiful, overly designed aesthetics reaching our users, you can see that it doesn't really matter if it's not fast. This is a site that I found that it's really beautiful, right? It has all of these awesome textures and photos, videos, parallax. It looks like a designer's dream. It's a really beautiful site. I really enjoy how it looks. But going to what does my site cost, it costs almost 5 megs, which maybe doesn't sound like a lot, but if we go and look at the actual users, that's costing some of them. There's also this tab where you can see it, how much it costs in their sort of income, like in their country. That costs some people almost 20% of their daily income to go to that parallaxy, cool image site. And that's kind of ridiculous. That's pretty narcissistic of us to be like, yes, you should spend lots of money to see things that I deem beautiful. And it's something that we definitely need to consider and try to cut down on and be aware of how much our design decisions can impact our users. So if we think of a project timeline, it might look a little something like this, where I'm a designer, I'm ramping up, I'm heads down, really figuring out the design. And I don't like to design without having a developer present on the project, sitting in on meetings, understanding what the client wants. And so I like to have them pop in while I'm starting design, and then as development is really ramping up, maybe I'm finishing up design and I'm kind of just like popping in and pairing with them and kind of figuring out things then in the browser. But if we think of the early design decisions where those parallax and textures and those really heavy decisions are made, I like to think of developers as kind of being my performance spirit guides. They help guide me in the right direction. Because again, I'm not technical. I don't know how it's going to be built, but I know how my decisions can affect the final build. And so if I come armed with this idea, with this mock-up, and I'm really excited about this, and this goes back to Dave's talk he was just giving about it being a team effort. So I come with my mock-up and then have the developer who is going to be building it out sit in on it, and they can look and say, like, that's pretty heavy, that will probably blow our performance budget, or hey, you know, this could be a little bit faster if we just tweaked this thing. So having them sit in on those design reviews and kind of look for any red flags of just like, whoa, we probably don't want to do that, will help before the client sees it and falls in love with it. And it comes down to a lot of pushing the client to prioritize. So say they want carousels on carousels and videos and all of this stuff, just bombarding the homepage. It's kind of an exercise of us to be like, well, you know, can we prioritize this a little differently? Maybe not all of the videos need to be on that page. Maybe we can kind of disperse them throughout the site, think about the holistic experience and how those can impact. And do you really need that carousel? Do you really need that video? What is the purpose? And again, when I talk about performance budgets, it's a really great client facilitator. But it's important to note when we have developers sitting in on design reviews that it's not for them to just push back because like they kind of hold the power of the code. It's like, oh, that's just hard to build, like I don't want to, or like that's a dumb idea, I hate carousels. Well, the client really wants it, we're kind of, our hands are tied, we kind of have to. Or just, it's not helpful if there's just no other alternatives or ideas offered, just like, nope, I don't want to build it, and I have no other alternatives. We want it to be this collaborative dialogue. It's not very constructive for a developer to just totally shut down designers' ideas. And that also is a really, really good way to make designers hate performance. If, you know, all of my ideas are just naysayed every time we're in a design review, I'm going to start to resent developers and the idea of performance. I'm just going to get really frustrated, and it's not going to help anyone. That's not helping the project. And it also helps a lot to get designs into code as early as we possibly can. I'm sure we all kind of know this, that's like the end goal. We want it to be in code. But the earlier that we can get these preliminary designs into code, we can run some performance tests on what those design decisions are. And then we can work together to try to refine these problem areas. And this is, you know, incorporating the client feedback and anything else that we're like, oh, I don't know, they wanted to add this, let's see how we can add that in a way that totally doesn't weigh down the page and things like that. It's a lot of this back and forth, but once it's into code, we can have real numbers to work with. And it's just this balancing act, right? Sometimes there will be things that we absolutely have to do for the design, and then there's some things that we can kind of be a little bit more forgiving about in the effort of making it faster. So I talked about all of these things about why people should care, and maybe people are really excited and like, oh yeah, that sounds great. In theory, I would love to do this stuff, but actually following through, that's a lot harder to do. It's definitely easier said than done. So that's where I think performance budgets really come in. It's this really great conversation tool, more than anything, to have between the client team and our team. It kind of works just like any other budget, like a monetary budget where you have a set number and you try to stick to it. And it absolutely needs to be established before design. I like to know all of the constraints that I have to design within before I even start. So we want to set this number before the designer starts designing. You know, we need to know all of those other requirements before we design, and performance is one of them, and the budget that we want to stick within so that we can make educated design decisions to stick to it. And then it's up to the rest of the team, including the client's team, to maintain it even beyond launch. We want to set the client up for success so that they know how to properly think about this and keep it going and maintain a fast site when we're not around anymore. Jasenia Perez-Cruz has this really great video from Smashing Conference last year where she talks about a lot of designing within a performance budget. And I used to work very closely with Jasenia at both of our previous jobs. And this is kind of like an off-the-record story. She talks a lot about this one major pizza chain retailer that we worked on together. And this was the first project that her and I both implemented a performance budget with the client. We knew we really wanted this site to be fast, and the developers were the ones that really pushed us, like, this would be a really cool idea, and we were both like open to it, and yeah, that sounds cool. And we came armed at kickoff. We had weighed all their competitors. We had all this this really awesome presentation about why this major pizza chain should be super fast. And the marketing team totally hated it. They were just like, that's not a feature. That's not a cool Domino's ordering delivery guide timeline thing that we can market and have commercials about. So they were totally not really on board. We tried to advocate for it, and they didn't really like it. But a couple weeks later, after that kickoff meeting, Domino's came out with their new commercial ad, whatever, where I think Blake Shelton, he has a phone, and he has the site pulled up, and he's like, Domino's, it's fast like a cheetah. It's like the fastest ordering experience on pizza. And that got them really wanting to use a performance budget. And they were like, oh, well, now Domino's is saying they have a really fast site. Well, now we want a really fast site. And so then we were like, all right, cool, we can do it. So we established a performance budget that was faster than Domino's. And that was a really, really great conversation tool for us to use throughout the rest of the design build. And we even somehow managed to wrangle it with the marketing team, who wanted to just throw all of the most giant images, just everything. Here's so many assets. They even wanted to use 15 or something, a ridiculous amount of font weights because of their new branding. They were like, oh, well, it's all mishmash and different and textures and all this stuff. What if we wrap every letter in a CSS mask with a texture so it looks letterpressed? And we were like, oh my God, that's going to be so heavy. No. So we had to really use that budget to wrangle them in and say, here's a couple different alternatives that are much faster than what you're asking. And it worked. Also, caveat, the site still isn't launched yet, so I'm interested to see if it actually has maintained as fast as we built it, but that'll be for a different talk. So to actually establish a performance budget, this is kind of the question that I get the most, what is the number I should use? And there's a couple hard and fast numbers out there that people say, this is the number you should try to hit. And I think when dealing with clients, that's not super realistic. A lot of them have a lot of different baggage. A lot of them have a lot of different branding and marketing requirements that it's hard to be no, we have to fit to this number. And so I think a really good place to start is thinking of our specific client and their goals and looking, again, to their competitors and trying to be, I think 20% faster is what Tim Cadlick has said in an article about trying to be 20% faster than competitors. And I think that that's a really good place to start, of trying to be realistic of what is a number that our clients' needs can actually meet. Because we don't want to set ourselves up for failure again and set this super low number and then blow it immediately and be like, oh, guess we won't do that anymore. We want it, again, to be kind of realistic and baby steps, and then maybe when they go through another redesign in a couple of years, they'll want it to be even faster than that one, and, baby steps. So these are the three kind of important metrics when thinking about performance, but for the sake of budgets and working with clients, I think page weight is the easiest number for everyone to kind of rally around. It's easy for non-technical people like myself to understand, okay, there is a flat number and I can add or subtract to it. That's pretty simple. Clients can understand it. When we get into seconds and load time, it's pretty abstract for clients to understand it, and it's hard for them to want to stick to. So I think just the solid page weight number is a really good place to start when talking about this with clients. So say that I have a $500 monthly budget that I allot myself to spend on things, and maybe I spend $100 on my groceries, $100 on clothes, and $300 on my rent. And maybe I'm saving up for something cool, a Tesla like Dave was just talking about. And so I drop my budget down to $400. And, well, that money needs to come out of somewhere. My rent's fixed, so it can't come out of that. So maybe I'll take $50 out of my grocery budget and $50 from my clothes budget, and then that adds up to my $400 budget. Pretty easy. that could be a performance budget. Maybe I set 400 kilobytes for my overall budget, and I spend 50 on fonts, 50 on my CSS, and 300 on my images. And the cool thing about using performance budgets with clients is that it's this give and take. So it's not just us saying no, no, no. It's like, okay, well, if you want to add that, we got to take from over here, and so on and so forth. So there's some wiggle room. If we want to add some JavaScript, we can take some of that from somewhere else. Maybe we want to add more fonts. As long as it's all adding up to the budget, it doesn't really matter how we use it. Because like any other budget, you can't spend what you don't have. So we have that set number. We can't just magically add numbers from somewhere. We have to kind of just shift them around. So to get the clients on board with it, working with their team to kind of understand holistically all the project goals, and again, finding that realistic sweet spot. And something that really, really helped us on that pizza site, we have this sort of project hub where we have all of our deliverables, all of our documents, everything. Maybe you use Basecamp, something like that. But we had a page in there that was specifically about the performance budget. And we had a lot of documentation in there about what a performance budget is, citing a lot of these articles, and what this specific project's budget is. So we had that number right there, really big, and we cited different goals and requirements from all of those early discussions, pulled it right out and said you wanted faster than Domino's or something. Put that right there in quotes from marketing guy A, and listing all of those goals that led up to that budget, or knowing we have to use a promotional video, so that impacted the goal, and that's how we determine this number. Why we're using this, again, all that stuff about why performance is important. How to add new features, which this is more for their team than it is for us. We want them to be able to maintain this well, so when you add a new feature, you either need to optimize something that's already there, remove something that's already there, or don't add your new feature. And we also had every single template that we built, its weight, and we had some that were under budget, and we had all of their weights and how that related to the performance budget. And then we had ones that were a little bit over budget, not bad. And then we had, I think, pretty much the homepage was significantly over budget. And then we even cited different suggestions that we had for improving that way over budget page. So having that living, breathing documentation about what to show them and how to use it was really important. And also the image optimization guide. We had a bunch of different resources and step-by-step guides on how to optimize their images, so that when we're not around anymore and they have to take this site and run with it, and they add in a bunch of super bloated images, well, there goes all of our efforts. So we want them to understand how to properly add these smaller images. But client work, curveballs. There's always going to be some stakeholder that comes in after we're all like feeling good about it and have a lot of really awesome designs that fit our budget. We're all feeling good. Someone comes in, swoops and poops, and just has like this really outlandish request that totally derails all of our efforts. But when they have that, again, we have these three options where we can say, okay, you want this new crazy feature. Well, what if we then reduce this down to a smaller feature? Or, you know, do we really need to have this secondary carousel of ads? Maybe we can remove that and find a different solution to handle that. Or we could just not add this new outlandish feature that you're requesting at the last minute. So if we go back to that 400 performance budget that I set for myself, maybe what they needed to add was some images, and that so we needed to bump up our budget for the images, and maybe that means we lose our fonts and we just use system fonts. And that's okay, because again, we can't spend what we don't have. And I talk about this a lot from a designer's point of view, and this has been hugely beneficial for me to make design decisions knowing these exact numbers of what I'm coming up with and how that affects the overall page weight. And it's just another constraint, and we just have to embrace it and stop fighting it and thinking that it's the antithesis of all of our great ideas. Like, I know that I definitely was pretty bummed out when my team was super excited about using a performance budget. I was just like, great, that sounds really boring and I don't want to do it. And it just sounded like that sucked the life out of like all my cool ideas. Like, it just didn't sound very cool. But we're designers. We know how to embrace these challenges and constraints and find cool things that we can do within these smaller boxes that we set for ourselves. And a lot of it comes down to collaborating. I said I switched my talk. We weren't going to talk about collaborating, but a lot of all of this performance stuff is designers and developers collaborating on finding these really awesome solutions that are also fast. So I don't determine this performance budget on my own. I need a developer there to totally understand what all is going to go into it. And it's really good to have these technical discussions with the client really early too. So they might have some legacy code that we absolutely have to use, and it might be really heavy, and that's unfortunate, but we have to do it. So having the developer understand sort of those technical constraints and me understanding like the marketing and overall project goals, we can work together to determine this really nice sweet spot number that will kind of be faster than what they already have, but also is that realistic goal. So we can have some of these conversations as we are working through trying to determine this budget, where I'm the designer and I say, I know the client's working on this new promotional video. They're super jazzed about it. They're really excited. They're spending a lot of time and money making this big video, and they need that video. And the developer might come and say, oh, okay, well, that might take up like this much or this much space on the page. So then maybe we can cut down on our fonts, and maybe they'll help me determine kind of a budget for my fonts. Or maybe I say, again, like that pizza site, like they had all these brand fonts that like we had to use. And then the developer can suggest like, okay, well, let's try only using like 1 or 2 weights of those different brand fonts to try to keep it reeled in and not just have 1,000 different type styles. Or we can even take it a little bit more bigger picture and say like, there's these goals we're trying to achieve, there's these brand guidelines, and then maybe the developer can just kind of overall estimate how much that could weigh. And again, we can like kind of use some tools to weigh stuff and then come up with a nice budget. And this is super important to having this collaboration be really successful in working together, is that it's not a trump card for developers. They may be the technical ones that are implementing it, but they can't just come in and say, I am the developer, I'm the one making it fast, and you have to make all of your design decisions around what I want to say. Like, it's just not helpful for anyone for me to say, the client has this promo video, they're spending all this money on it, they're really excited about it, we have to include it, and then the developer's just like, no, I have this budget that I set in my head, and that just doesn't fit into my budget, and no, 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 it's not going to work. We can't do that. That's not helping anyone. We don't want developers, again, to just come in and totally hate on designers' ideas and make them hate performance. So fonts are, I think, the most critical thing that designers can control when thinking of making our sites faster. I wrote this article last year where I weighed different popular typefaces and how much they weigh, and they have some pretty drastic differences. Let's take something like Futura. I love Futura. I think it's beautiful. It's one of my favorite typefaces. I like to use it, but it's pretty heavy. Just using the 4 weights is 268 kilobytes. And maybe if my client is a little bit more lenient, maybe I can play around and find something that kind of has a similar feel. Like Brandon Grotesque is not like totally the same, but it has some of the same similar characteristics, and it's almost half the size. And I'm not saying like you need to only choose the fastest typeface that you can possibly find. It's back to that balance, back to that give and take. So it comes down to like you asking yourself, is that 135 kilobyte difference worth the aesthetic change? Will that be used better elsewhere? Or does the font that's heavier represent the brand better? And if that's the case, absolutely, go with your design gut and choose the one that better represents the brand and that you feel best about. But I just encourage designers to think about it when looking for typefaces, to just consider the weight of it as much as we consider like a generous X height for our body copy, or consider if we want it to be serif or sans serif. Just think about the weight of your font kit also as one of those parameters. And you can also set font budgets for your kit. So similarly, like I had that whole monthly budget and I had a grocery budget within it. Maybe within my grocery budget, I have $20 for vegetables, $20 for pizzas, $20 for fruits, and maybe $40 for meats. And maybe my font kit looks kind of similar, where I have 20 for each of them and 40 for bold italic. And again, these are totally just kind of made up numbers. But curveball, again, we're always going to have them. Something happened, I had to go to the vet and spend $60, and now I only have $40 to spend on groceries this week. So maybe I'll be healthy and I'll only spend $20 on veggies and $20 on fruits, and then I'll supplement that with all that food that I have in my pantry at home that I've been avoiding eating that I just know is always there. And in the same way, we can think of system fonts like that. Maybe I will just have 2 weights of my fun display face and then use system fonts for the body copy. And again, it's all that give and take. So it's pretty malleable to think of all these things, and we have a lot of wiggle room within our design decisions to make these more performant decisions. So how does this set up everything to have that successful fast build and we have a more performant site? Well, the client understands the benefit because we've been educating them from our first conversations. We had a kickoff where we talked about it. They're all on board and they totally understand how this aligns with their goals. Our PM also understands performance and is advocating for us with all of their early conversations with the client. And then I'm starting design within a performance budget, so all of my design decisions are hopefully going to not be super heavy and bogging down the page and making the developer mad that they have to try to make that fast. And now the development is successfully primed and prepared to integrate all of those wonderful things that make sites fast and thinking of performance as a priority. So a lot of what I just talked about was advocating and getting excited and stuff, so I think resources are a really important part of that. And through my own curiosity of wondering how really awesome organizations foster this very important culture of performance, Tim Cadlick and I started a podcast called Path to Performance, same name as this talk, where we are interviewing people that have these cultures of performance and just trying to find out, how do you do it? I know, like, what I've struggled with trying to get other people to care, so how have these successful places gotten people to care? And Laura was our first guest, and we learned a lot of really cool things that Etsy's doing, so that will hopefully be a really awesome growing resource for people to see what other organizations are doing. And inspired by the podcast, we also started a performance Slack, and there's a lot of really cool conversations happen on there. So if you actually go to this Heroku URL, you can sign yourself up and join our Slack and join those conversations and ask a lot of really cool people really cool things on what they're doing. And here's a list of a lot of the things that I talked about in my talk today, and these slides are online, so you can totally check them out. Thank you.